The roast chicken was perfectly golden. The table was set with Mom's good china, the set she only brought out when Aunt Patricia visited from Phoenix. There were fresh flowers in the center, a bottle of Pinot Grigio already breathing on the counter, and the kind of careful domestic performance my mother had been staging my entire life. I drove 40 minutes to get there. I brought dessert, a chocolate torte from the bakery on Clement Street that cost $32. I set it on the kitchen counter without saying anything about the price, the drive, or the fact that I had a product launch presentation due the following Tuesday that I'd been awake past midnight finishing for the last 4 nights. I sat down at the table between my younger brother Derek and my Aunt Patricia, who smelled like Chanel No. 5 and always asked the same 3 questions. Was I seeing anyone? Had I lost weight? And wasn't it time to think about moving back closer to home? Dinner was fine for the first 20 minutes. Then Mom started. It didn't begin as an attack. It never did. It began as a story, the way it always began. Mom was telling Aunt Patricia about Derek's new promotion at the logistics firm, about how hard he worked, how dedicated he was to the family, how he never forgot to call on Sundays. She was building the kind of portrait that made everyone at the table feel the comparison without her having to make it directly. I refilled my wine glass and said nothing. Derek understands what it means to show up, Mom said, her voice warm and carrying. Some people, they get busy, they get comfortable, and they just, she paused, shaking her head with a small, sorrowful smile. They forget where they came from. Aunt Patricia nodded sympathetically. I cut my chicken. You don't know what sacrifice means, Mom continued, pivoting slightly toward Aunt Patricia but angling her voice in my exact direction. She thinks only of herself. Dad didn't even look up from his plate. Always has, he said flatly, like it was a fact as settled as the weather. Derek studied his fork. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. That was the best Derek ever managed, looking uncomfortable while doing nothing. Aunt Patricia made a soft sound of agreement and reached for the bread basket. I set my fork down. I picked up my wine glass. I smiled. Not a stiff smile. Not a wounded smile. A genuine, calm, almost curious smile. The smile of someone watching a situation from a very comfortable distance, knowing something that no one else at the table knows yet. Patricia, Mom continued, fully warmed up now. Do you know she didn't even call on your mother's birthday last month? Her own grandmother. I sent flowers, I said pleasantly. Flowers. Mom repeated the word like it tasted sour. That's what this family means to her. A flower delivery. They were very nice flowers, Grandma said from the end of the table, but nobody acknowledged her. I took another sip of wine. Here is what nobody at that table knew. I had wired $3,800 to my parents' mortgage account on the first of every single month for the past 4 years and 3 months. I had been paying their utilities, gas, electric, water, since my father's construction business lost its biggest contract in the spring of 2020 and never fully recovered. I had covered Derek's car insurance for 2 years because he'd had 2 minor accidents and his premiums had become what Mom described as impossible. I had paid for my parents' water heater replacement, their new refrigerator, the roof repair after the storm damage in February 2022, and 3 separate occasions where Dad called me because the account was short before payday. Total, over 4 years, somewhere north of $280,000. Not a single person at that table, not Mom, not Dad, not Derek, not Aunt Patricia, had ever said thank you at a Sunday dinner. Not once. The money moved quietly the way I had learned to move in this family. Invisibly, without acknowledgement, without credit. I had learned long ago that the more I gave, the more invisible the giving became. It simply recalibrated their baseline. The support became assumed. The silence around it became permanent. And somehow, incrementally, I became the selfish one. I smiled and refilled my glass. I need to go back a little because none of this started at that Sunday dinner. It started 27 years ago in a 3-bedroom house in Daly City, where I was the oldest of 3 children, and where the phrase "you're so responsible" was the highest compliment my parents ever paid me, and also I would come to understand the most expensive. Being responsible in my family meant being available. It meant being the one who handled things. When Dad's temper made a situation worse, I smoothed it over. When Mom's anxiety spiraled before holidays, I managed the logistics. When Derek was struggling in middle school, I tutored him twice a week for an entire semester. I was good at school, genuinely, naturally good, and that created its own strange resentment. Not from my parents openly, but in the way praise for me was always slightly qualified. "Oh, she's the smart one," Mom would say to relatives with a tone that contained something that wasn't quite pride. When I was accepted to UC Berkeley on a merit scholarship, Dad said, "Don't let it go to your head." I didn't. Kept my head down. I double majored in computer science and business. I graduated with a 3.91 GPA and 3 job offers. I took the one in San Francisco that paid the most, moved into a one-bedroom apartment in the Richmond district and started building. My name is Celeste Varga. I'm 34 years old. I am the VP of Product Strategy at a mid-sized enterprise software company called Meridian Systems. My base salary is $310,000. My equity compensation last year added another $180,000. I have a personal investment portfolio managed through Harlow Capital that, as of the most recent quarterly statement, is valued at just under $2.1 million. I'm not a billionaire. I am not a tech founder. But I have been extremely careful, extremely disciplined, and extremely generous to a family that has never once acknowledged any of it. The financial support began quietly, the way most of my relationship with my family operated, without a formal conversation, without any clear agreement. In 2020, Dad called me in April and said the business was slow. I asked how much he needed. He said $5,000. I wired $7,000 and told him not to worry about it. 6 months later he called again. By 2021 I had set up a recurring transfer. It made more sense than the calls. $2,000 a month, then $2,500 then, when their adjustable mortgage rate increased and Dad's business failed to recover the way we both kept telling ourselves it would, $3,800. Mom never asked directly where the money came from. I don't think she fully allowed herself to know. There is a particular talent my mother has for accepting comfort without registering its source, the way you might run a heater all winter without ever checking who paid the gas bill. The heat was simply there. The house was warm. She moved through the warmth and complained about the cold outside. Derek knew vaguely. He'd seen the transfers once when helping Dad with the online banking. He never mentioned it to me and I never brought it up with him. By 2023, I had quietly paid for more than I'd ever planned to. But I had also quietly watched more than I'd ever expected to. I watched my mother tell her book club that my brother Derek was the family's rock. I watched my father brag about Derek's promotion at a neighborhood barbecue without mentioning my name once. I watched Mom accept a generous Mother's Day gift I had sent, a spa weekend that cost $600, and then call Aunt Patricia to say how thoughtful Derek had been lately. I started keeping records. Not out of anger initially. Out of habit. I work in data, I document things. But eventually the documentation became something else. It became clarity. Printed bank statements in a manila folder in the top drawer of my filing cabinet. Every wire transfer, dated and confirmed. Every receipt for the appliances, the roof repair, the car insurance. A clean, precise, devastating account of what I had actually given this family, sitting silently in a drawer while I was described repeatedly as the one who gave nothing. By the time of the Sunday dinner with Aunt Patricia, I had been running what I privately thought of as a patience experiment for a very long time. I want to be accurate about my own motivations here. I was not purely strategic in the beginning. I helped my family because they needed it and because I could, and because there is a part of me, a stubborn, hopeful, deeply stupid part, that kept believing the dynamic would shift. That one day Mom would say something real. That Dad would call just to call, not because an account was short. That didn't happen. What happened instead was an incremental escalation of the narrative that I was the selfish one. The less I spoke about what I was doing, the more easily it was erased. The more I absorbed without complaint, the more complaint was directed my way. I had accidentally built a perfect trap for myself. The more I proved I didn't need acknowledgement, the less I received it, which was then used as evidence that I didn't care about the family. I had one conversation about it once. In 2022, after Mom made a comment at Easter about how Derek always made time for family while some people were too busy. I pulled her aside after dinner and said quietly that I wanted her to know how much I'd been contributing financially, and that it would mean something to me if that was occasionally recognized. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "We didn't ask you to do that. That was your choice. Don't use money to try to buy affection, Celeste. It's ugly." I drove home and sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes. Then I went upstairs and did not cancel the transfers. I moved the folder from my filing cabinet to my fireproof safe. And I started documenting with much greater precision. I also called my attorney, a sharp, unhurried woman named Diane Okonkwo who had handled my employment contracts and some of my investment paperwork. I asked her, hypothetically, what documentation I would need if I ever needed to establish a pattern of financial support provided without legal obligation. She told me. I followed her instructions exactly. Over the next 2 years I built a complete, legally organized record of every dollar. Every transfer had a corresponding bank statement. Every payment had a receipt. Diane reviewed the file twice and told me it was, in her words, unusually thorough. I also hired a forensic accountant named Robert Ching on a retainer basis. Robert had been recommended to me by a colleague who had gone through a business partnership dispute. I had Robert run a quiet review of my parents' financial accounts, not illegally and not without basis. I had been an authorized account holder on their joint account since 2020, added at my father's request so I could make transfers more easily. That access was never revoked. What Robert found over the course of 8 months was not entirely surprising. But it was, in its details, worse than I had allowed myself to fully expect. There were 2 credit cards opened in my name that I had not opened. One in 2021, one in 2022. Combined balance, $47,300. The payments had been made from my parents' account but the cards were in my name, meaning the debt registered on my credit profile. My credit score, which I checked infrequently because I didn't need credit, had dropped 61 points. There was also a personal loan, taken out in 2022, with my name listed as co-signer. I had not co-signed any loan. The signature on the document, when Robert obtained a copy, was not mine. The loan amount was $78,000. I sat with Robert's report for 3 days before I called Diane. Then I sat with Diane's assessment for another 2 weeks. Then I went to Sunday dinner with Aunt Patricia, brought a chocolate torte, smiled, refilled my wine glass, and listened to my mother tell the table I didn't understand sacrifice. I drove home at 9:15 that Sunday night. The city was cool and fogged in the way I had always loved about San Francisco, the way the headlights looked diffused and haloed, the way the streets got quiet fast. I parallel parked in front of my building, sat in the car for a moment and did a small private calculation. 4 years and 3 months of mortgage payments at $3,800. $194,800. Utilities averaged at $620 per month. $31,620. Derek's car insurance 26 months at $340. $8,840. Appliances and repairs, documented, $24,340. Additional direct transfers 4 shortfalls, $22,700. Total, $282,300. Against which my mother had offered 0 acknowledgement, 2 years of escalating commentary about my selfishness, 1 memorable statement that using money to seek affection was ugly, and tonight a performance for Aunt Patricia. I went upstairs. I made chamomile tea. I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank's automatic payment portal. I found the recurring transfer to account 8,823, my parents' joint account, which I had been funding for 51 consecutive months. I sat with the cursor on the cancel button for approximately 45 seconds. Then I clicked it. Then I called the utility company and removed myself as the backup payer on both their gas and electric accounts. Then I called the insurance company and removed myself from Derek's auto policy. I didn't send a message. I didn't call. I didn't write an email explaining what I had done or why. I simply stopped. Then I called Diane Okonkwo. "I'm ready," I said. "I'll contact Robert in the morning," she said. "Do you want to give them any window before we file?" I thought about it. "For days," I said. "For days," she confirmed. I finished my tea, closed my laptop and went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. The first day, nothing. The second day, nothing. I went to work. I ran my Tuesday presentation, the product launch deck I'd been preparing, and it went well. My team lead told me it was the clearest strategic framework she'd seen from any of the VPs that quarter. I went out to lunch with my colleague Priya, who had been my closest friend for 6 years and who was one of exactly 2 people on earth who knew what I had been carrying. Over phone, I told her what I had done. She put her spoon down. "Finally," she said. The third day my father texted, "Hey, Did you get a chance to set up this month's transfer? Seems like it might not have gone through. I read it. I set my phone face down on my desk. I did not respond. The fourth day at 7:43 in the morning my mother called. I let it ring through to voicemail. She left a message, 3 minutes and 40 seconds long, that began with controlled concern and ended somewhere closer to fury. The mortgage payment hadn't posted. The electric company had sent a notice. She didn't understand what was happening. There must be some mistake. I needed to call her back immediately. At 9:15 she called again. I was in a meeting. At 11:02 she called from my father's phone. I was on a call with a vendor. At 12:47 she texted, "Celeste, this is not funny. Call me." At 2:30, Dad texted, "We need to talk. This is serious." At 4:15 I called Diane. "Has Robert filed?" "This morning," she said. "The fraud referral is with the bank's investigative unit and the DA's office has the identity theft documentation. We should expect contact within the week." "Good," I said. At 6:52 that evening my phone rang. I answered. "Where has the money been?" she started, voice already elevated. Not hello. Not are you okay? Straight to it. "Hi Mom." "Do not hi Mom me. The mortgage payment didn't post. The electric sent a shut-off notice. What is going on?" "I cancelled the transfers," I said. Pause. Very short. "What?" "I cancelled the automatic transfers to your account. All of them." Another pause longer. "Why would you? What do you mean you cancelled them?" "We depend on." She stopped. Restarted. "This is because of dinner on Sunday. This is a tantrum." "It's not a tantrum," I said. "It's a decision." "Celeste." Her voice shifted into the tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable and in control. The tone that had worked on me for 20 years. "We can talk about Sunday. If your feelings were hurt I understand, but you can't just. This affects the whole family. This isn't just about you." "I know it's not just about me," I said. "That's actually the point." "What does that mean?" "It means that for 4 years and 3 months I've been paying your mortgage, your utilities, your insurance and your emergency shortfalls. $282,300 in total, documented and confirmed. And in that same period you have told multiple family members repeatedly that I contribute nothing and care only about myself." Silence. "Mom, I need you to listen carefully. I've retained a forensic accountant named Robert Ching. Robert reviewed the accounts I have access to, the joint account I've been making transfers into since 2020. He found 2 credit cards opened in my name without my authorization. He found a loan co-signed with what appears to be a forged signature. The combined liability affecting my credit profile is over $125,000. I could hear her breathing. "I've retained an attorney. The documentation has been referred to the bank's fraud investigative unit. The DA's office has received a full identity theft filing. My attorney will be sending a formal notice to you and Dad tomorrow morning by certified mail." Celeste. Her voice had changed. The performance was gone. What was underneath it was smaller. "Celeste, we can fix this. We can talk about this. I think we should let the bank and the DA's office handle the talking from here," I said. "My attorney will be in touch. You're going to have your own parents investigated? Your own family? You had credit cards opened in my name," I said. "You used my identity. I didn't make that choice. You did. This is, she was searching for the word. I had heard her do this before when reality outpaced her ability to reframe it. "This is so selfish," she finally said. "I can't believe how selfish you are." I took a breath. A very calm, very quiet breath. "I know that's what you believe," I said. "I hope at some point you'll look at Robert's report and reconsider. But I'm not going to argue about it. You're ruining this family." "The certified mail will arrive tomorrow before noon," I said. "I'd suggest you have an attorney present when you open it." I hung up. The certified letters arrived the next morning as Diane had promised. One addressed to both my parents, one to Derek given his name appeared on several of the insurance irregularities Robert had flagged. My father called 3 times that day. I let every call go to voicemail. His messages moved through the same arc my mother's voice had moved through the night before. Confusion, then justification, then something that sounded almost like genuine alarm. The third message was the one I listened to most carefully, his voice quieter, some of the usual authority stripped out of it, asking if there was any way to handle this privately without involving authorities. I forwarded the voicemail to Diane. The bank's investigative unit contacted my parents within 72 hours of Robert's referral. Their joint account was flagged pending review. The 2 credit cards opened in my name were immediately suspended and the outstanding balances, $47,300, were formally disputed in my name, which initiated a recovery process that would affect my parents' account. The forged co-signature on the $78,000 loan triggered a separate investigation. That process moved faster than any of us expected. The loan had been issued by a regional lender that had recently come under regulatory scrutiny for their origination practices, which meant they were, in Robert's words, extraordinarily motivated to cooperate. Within 10 days of that Sunday dinner, the following things had happened. My parents' mortgage entered a formal missed payment status. Their electric account was transferred to their sole name without the backup payment guarantee that had been keeping their rate stable. Derek called me twice. The second call I answered because Derek had not opened cards in my name and I was not prepared to cut him off entirely. I didn't know about the cards, he said. I believe you, I said. Did you know for long? Long enough. Why didn't you say anything? I thought about that Sunday dinner. Bacon. The good china. The flowers nobody acknowledged. Mom's voice, perfectly pitched to Carrie, telling Aunt Patricia I didn't understand sacrifice. I wanted to be sure, I said. Derek went quiet for a moment. What do I do? Talk to your own attorney, I said. Stay out of their accounts. Don't touch anything. If the DA's office contacts you, cooperate completely and honestly. He said okay. He sounded genuinely shaken in a way that made me sad for him and impatient with myself for being sad. Derek had always been the one who looked uncomfortable and did nothing, and I had always, privately, held him a little less responsible for it than I should have. At the 3-week mark, my parents retained a defense attorney. Diane received his contact information and they began the process that attorneys begin when criminal fraud allegations are in motion and everyone is trying to find the least catastrophic path forward. At the 5-week mark, my credit score, which had dropped 61 points due to the fraudulent accounts, was formally flagged for dispute restoration. The process takes time, but the documentation Robert had assembled was, as the credit bureau representative told me, some of the cleanest fraud documentation she'd reviewed. Aunt Patricia called me. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. I didn't know, she said. About the money. About any of it. Most people didn't, I said. Your mother, she stopped. I've known your mother a long time, Celeste. I love her. But I'm sorry. I'm sorry I sat at that table and nodded. It was the most unexpected thing anyone in that family orbit said to me during the entire ordeal. I thanked her and I meant it. Priya came over that Saturday and we ordered Thai food and watched 2 episodes of a show I hadn't had time for in months, and she didn't make it into a bigger moment than it was. She just said once quietly, "You did the right thing." And I nodded and we moved on. 6 months have passed. The legal proceedings are ongoing. I have been advised not to discuss specific outcomes while the DA's process is active, so I won't. What I can say is that I have not paid my parents' mortgage since that Sunday dinner, and I do not intend to. The house I paid for in actual material fact for 51 months, is now genuinely in jeopardy. I feel the weight of that sometimes, in the way you feel the weight of any complicated thing. Not without emotion but without the kind of guilt that used to live in my chest like a low permanent ache. I thought about the money I gave them. Not with bitterness mostly. I had it. They needed it. In the early years it came from a real place, a place that wanted connection and was willing to pay for it the only way it knew how. But here is what I know now that I didn't know then. There is a version of generosity that comes from abundance and there is a version that comes from need. The version that comes from need is not generosity, it is negotiation. And when the other party doesn't know they're in a negotiation, the terms can never be honored, and you spend 4 years and 3 months wondering why you keep losing a game nobody told you were playing. I stopped playing. My attorney Diane, sharp, unhurried Diane, called me 2 weeks after the initial filings to say the case was developing in ways that confirmed every document Robert had produced. You built a very clean record, she said. I had time, I said. She laughed, a short professional laugh. Celeste, she said before she hung up, Do you want me to tell you something I don't usually tell clients? Sure. Most people who come to me in situations like this waited too long, she said. They gave more than they should have, they documented less than they needed to, and by the time they were ready the evidence was thin and the damage was done. You are not that client. You are the organized, patient, clear-eyed exception. I thanked her. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment. My apartment in the Richmond district where the fog comes in off the bay in the evenings and the streets go quiet fast. And I thought about that Sunday dinner. The good china. The $32 torte on the counter. Mom's voice carrying across the table with that particular precision. You don't know what sacrifice means. She thinks only of herself. I refilled my glass. I smiled. They were right about one thing at the end of it. I do think about myself now. I think about myself clearly without apology, without the low permanent ache. It turns out that's not selfishness. It just looks like it from a table you've been invisibly feeding for years. Disclaimer. This is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. All characters, situations, and events depicted are entirely fictional.